Okay, we can get started. A few people are trickling in, so I'll take attendance in a few minutes. Welcome. Today we're going to continue with our discussion of diversity and job attitudes, and I'm going to start with a discussion of the writing issues I alluded to in the email a few days ago. Or at least some of them, and with any remaining time, we can get started talking about interpersonal skills, which is the next, the material in the next chapter. It seems like there's only a few people here for some reason. I'm not sure why it's only 11 people. I assume some will be trickling in, but basically, what I was talking about in the other class, like one thing that you need to get started on is the making sure that your sentences are not too long. I think I've talked about this already, but there were still people like on the discussion boards who are writing sentences without any punctuation or with not enough punctuation. So you should look at your sentences and basically make sure that they're you're averaging, your sentences should average about 15 words per sentence. It's okay to have fewer words, and occasional sentences of 30 words, say, are fine, but the average should be roughly 15. So you should be counting your words. If you've written a sentence with 60 words, it's wrong. There's something wrong, and you need to figure it out. So, basically, there should be one main clause per sentence, occasionally two, but if you just write sentences with one main clause and you don't have any subordinate clauses and you don't have any compound sentences, in other words, two main clauses per sentence, you're not, it's not going to be articulate, it's not going to be like great writing or anything, but it's going to be a lot better writing than what a lot of you do now. So, you can think about it like, if you can understand the idea of a main clause, that it's just a subject and a verb along with any object or predicate, that this very simple construction with no conjunctions is clear. It's a clear way to write English, and it's easier. There's less to understand. So, there was someone in one of the classes wrote a discussion board. I don't remember what class even, but he, so I'll put it on the whiteboard that he, it was like stringing it along. So, it was like, here, text. So it was like, Enron, Enron was an oil company. It committed fraud. Getting people to the class. It committed fraud. Sorry, so it committed fraud. It had bad accounting practices. The leaders went to jail. Okay, something like that. And there's no punctuation in between the sentences, and that's terrible. I mean, anyone who reads that is gonna, not take you seriously. Knows whoever writes like that isn't going to be taken seriously. So you got to think about what is a sentence, and basically a sentence is, it starts with a capital, it's got a subject and a verb, possibly a predicate, and possibly an object. So I go to school. Okay, I go to school. To school modifies go. It's a verb with a predicate modifier, and that's all there is to it. I go to school, period. I study organizational behavior, period. And so it's okay to write short sentences. It's not okay to write really long sentences. That's it's always a bad thing. And so if you can learn how to write somewhat longer sentences, that's great. But I've talked about some of the tricks that you need to use a coordinating conjunction or fanboys after a comma, or use a semicolon or a colon at times, or use new sentences, or join an additional idea or two with a subordinating conjunction. That's all fine, but you shouldn't have more than one or two clauses per sentence, maybe three. Three is the maximum. So conjunctions are, they're either subordinating conjunctions, when, after, because, those are all subordinating conjunctions. When I go to school, I study. That is fine. It starts with a subordinating conjunction, and then the main clause is I study. You can have two of those clauses per sentence, or maybe three, but you shouldn't have more than that. So if you're writing sentences with a lot of clauses and there are a lot of conjunctions, just cut it short. Just eliminate the conjunctions, create a main clause, end the sentence. So, the sentences that you write, ideally, the shorter, the better, I would say, in general. I'm not saying that's going to lead to the best English writing in the world, but what matters is not so much in business. What matters is not so much that you write elegantly, but that you write clearly. And, if I think about in my career, I've worked in government. I worked briefly in government. I worked in the corporate world. I've worked in academia. I've done expert witness work with some law firms. And I've dealt with the media. I've done, not always successfully, incidentally, but I've done a lot of, I've worked with different kinds of people in different walks of life. And what I've found is that the best writers that I've met are the lawyers at the white shoe law firms, at the top law firms. Okay, I've done some consulting work with years ago, a long time ago, with Jones Day, Rivas and Pogue. I've worked with a couple of, I think one was Meyer, Brown, and Platt. Was that what it's called? Meyer, Brown. Meyer, Brown, and I've worked also with Vincent and Elkins, which was also Enron's lawyer. Maybe you remember that from the movie. I've dealt with some other ones too. And basically, the lawyers in these top law firms are incredibly good writers. They're better writers than journalists. And the lawyers at the mid-sized firms, I've dealt with quite a few of those too, when I was doing expert witness work years ago, and they were also decent writers. They weren't as good as the top ones, but they were pretty good. The corporate people were also good writers. When I worked, especially when I worked at J&J, but when I worked at Inco, they paid a lot of attention. Everything was checked and rewritten, and the same thing with J&J is a lot of attention. They even wanted me to take a writing class when I first got there, and so on. I was like stunned because I felt like I was a good writer, but they said I need to learn. And so basically, the worst of the writers that overall are the academics, the professors. They're like terrible writers mostly. And as a result, it's like you're probably not going to get too much good advice about writing. I'll just throw in a couple of points that when I got interested in this about 10 or 12 years ago, I called the English department, and they told me that they don't correct people's writing at all. When you write a term paper, they said they don't do the grammar, they don't correct it. And as a result, you're not going to get a lot of good advice, because what really matters is the grammar. Being creative, say, oh, you should just write and be creative. I've heard this even on the website of the Chicago Manual of Style. One of the editors there said, oh, just let students be creative. It's ridiculous, because what you need in business is to write clearly, and that depends on your grammar. So one of the things I noticed, which I noticed in a few, it wasn't just one student, it was a number of students, I'm putting on the whiteboard, is that there's a lack in a number of people's sentences of agreement between the number of the noun, the subject, and the number of the verb. So that's called subject verb number agreement. So for example, if you say, the boys, trying to think, no one did this, but the boys goes to school. Okay, the boys is plural, goes is singular, and it's wrong. If it's a plural noun, you have the plural subject. You have to use a plural verb. The plural form of the verb usually won't have an S at the end, whereas the plural form of the noun usually will have an S at the end. So it's a little bit confusing, but you want them to match, and you should check every sentence to make sure that the number of the noun matches the number of the verb. One place where this is often very confusing is when you've got a prepositional phrase or other modifying phrase that follows the noun, and the object of the preposition is a plural. Okay, so here, here, I don't think it's a fairly obvious mistake, but this kind of mistake, I make this kind of mistake myself at times. The number of the schools doesn't determine the number of the verb. The subject is the principal. So the fact that the two schools is plural shouldn't influence the number of the verb. The correct number is singular, and the principal of the two schools goes to work. So in other words, when you have this kind of prepositional phrase after an initial subject, that doesn't change the number of the verb, and people have been missing that at times. But it's also that it's sometimes more straightforward that they use a straightforward singular subject, and then they follow it with a plural verb. And it's not hard to learn. It's not hard to learn the principle. As long as you know the verb forms, once you memorize those, it's not difficult. So you should always be careful of that. So I just gave you like two things that you should check every sentence for when you do any kind of writing. I don't care whether it's a discussion board or a term paper or whatever, or just a letter to a friend, that the number of the subject should match the number of the verb, and that you shouldn't have too many clauses per sentence, that you want to limit the number of clauses to one or two. Now, there's a principle that I can alert you to that is easy to learn, and it's helpful in improving the clarity of your writing. It's a style issue, not a grammatical one. So in other words, not doing it doesn't mean you're grammatically wrong, but it means that your writing can be confusing. And that is called a parallelism or parallel structure. And some Purdue Owl calls it parallel construction, whatever you want to call it, it's parallel. And so basically, the idea is that when you write a list, you give each item the same grammatical form. So if you write like, I like skiing, to swim, and a hike. Okay. If you look at this list, it's got skiing it's a noun, but it's what's called a gerund. It's a verb that's been turned into a noun by adding ing. That's so if you say running is fun, that's a gerund. Or I like skiing, that's a gerund. Or fighting is no solution. Fighting is a gerund, that you've turned the verb fight into a noun by adding ing. So in this list, you've got a gerund, an infinitive, to swim, and an ordinary noun. Okay, so to make it parallel, you could say, I like skiing, swimming, and hiking. Okay, so by making them all into gerunds, you've smoothed it out. And lists can be especially confusing. And so, the most famous, one of the most famous lists of this was said when Julius Caesar, the guy who ended the Roman Republic, basically turned it into a dictatorship. He was earlier in his career had conquered a city in Turkey called Zela, and he sent a messenger back home to the Roman Senate. And I don't know if this is known for certain, but there have been accounts of this. And the message was Veni Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Okay, so we still remember this 2,000 years later, better than 2,000 years later, because 2,200 years later, even, because it's parallel. It has a parallel structure. Now you'll notice I used semicolons. You could have used, because these are short clauses, you could have used commas, but the correct punctuation for three main clauses is semicolons. I came, I saw, I conquered. I went to school. I went to work. I went home. Okay, so with that kind of connecting three main clauses, you can use a semicolon. So basically, the idea of parallel structure is that you want each section, each element or item in the list to have the same grammatical form. Okay, if you're making a list. I don't encourage the use of lists. They're often an easy way out. But if you're making a list, give them all the same form. Now, in the other class, I was talking about the greengrocer apostrophe, and the greengrocer apostrophe, I see it every once in a while. As some British grammarian created this idea. It's the when you confuse the plural form and the possessive form. And a lot of students in the class have done that. I've seen multiple times in all my classes that students have can you use my writing on career goals as an example from Blackboard? Okay, I can actually. If you want me to do that, I would not normally do that to a student, but Brendan, if you want me to, I can analyze your paper and share it with the class. Do you want me to do that? If so, I can. So if I had fewer students, I could do that for everybody privately. Okay, that's a good idea. So if I had fewer students, and in most of my classes, I've done at least one assignment like that, but I have 140 students this semester. I have 4 classes. So it's like virtually impossible for me to do it and retain my sanity. So basically I'm going over some of this more conceptually, but it's not as good. If I make you what I usually would do is have you write something and then rewrite it based on what I change. And maybe the students don't enjoy that, but it's a lot more effective in teaching, in learning. Okay, how do we get rid of this now? I can't figure out how to get rid of this message thing. All right, let me. No, that doesn't work. Okay, let me stop share. And then I'll start share. Let's see if that sends it away. Okay. So, so the greengrocer apostrophe is like if you say the soldiers went into battle. Okay. You're confusing the possessive form with the plural form, and you don't want to do that. So it's easy to know when to use a possessive form because the possessive form precedes a noun. So there's always a noun. So if you say the soldiers' formation was good, okay, or the pilot's formation, we do a 12 o'clock high. The soldiers' formation was good. There, the formation belongs to the soldiers, so you use the apostrophe. And basically, you use the possessive when you want to suggest ownership or association. So the students' performance was excellent. All right, so basically the performance belonged to the student. When I put the apostrophe after the S, that means it's plural. There are many students. If I put the apostrophe before the S, that means there's one student. Okay, both are possible, but they mean different things. So if you use the apostrophe for a group, you always put it after the S. Okay, now another point a couple of quick points that I can make. A lot of people at Brooklyn College use the word would incorrectly. I'm not sure of the reason. I think it may be some kind of like regional kind of form of speech or something. Like it's like a speech pattern that's common in Brooklyn. But whatever the reason, the reason is unimportant because it's easy to correct. In other words, the word would has a few very specific meanings, and unless you want to intend one of those meanings, don't use would. Okay, so always ask yourself when you use would, am I using it the right way? And this is more important in writing than in speech, but it's important in both. So, I mean, you might check yourself when you use would when you're talking. So you don't use would as a statement of fact. So you want to use the present tense. So I would be in this class, or I would be, are you Professor Langbert students? I would be Professor Langbert student. Okay, that's an incorrect use of would. All right, what you want to say is you are my student, or so you would use I am Professor Langbert student. Okay, so you want to use the present tense for a statement of fact. You don't want to use would. Would is used to suggest unreality. So if you say something like, if I were president, I would require everyone to eat ice cream for breakfast. Okay, so if you were president, which is obviously not true, you would require everyone to eat ice cream for breakfast. And would, in a sense, is they call it the first conditional, which means like it's a conditional that's not likely to be true. You know, you could say if I get, if I get elected, I will require everyone to eat ice cream. So in that case, you're talking about a likely occurrence, or at least a possible occurrence, that you're running for office. If I get elected, then I will. You know, that would be like, I think they call that the first conditional. So basically, you use will for a real future. You use would for a fantasy future. Okay, so if you say, I would be Joe Smith, then okay, let's do the waiting room. I'll stop the share and we will okay. Oh, I don't see anyone in the waiting room. I don't know what happened there. So basically, going back to the uses of would, what are the uses of would? When do you use would correctly? You use would, so you use would for an unreal conditional. You use would for a counterfactual, like I wouldn't do that if I were you. Okay, so it's not a statement of reality. You're not you. I mean, you're not the other person, but you're saying I would not do that if I were you. It's an unreal circumstance. You use would for the past tense of will. So You said you would go. Okay, you said you would visit us and then you didn't. You use would for a polite request or a wish. So would you please pass the butter? Is a polite request. And wish is I would like to be president. Okay, so that's like a wish. So for those things, you can use would, it's perfectly right. Repeated action in the past. When I was a student, I would work and go to school every day. Okay, that's repeated action in the past. All of those are legitimate uses of would. And you can look these up on the web, if you just Google how to use would, you'll get a number of websites that tell you. So you can, you can think about whether you're using would correctly. Okay, here's Raquel. You can think about using would correctly, and be sure that when you use it, you don't use it in place of the present tense. Instead of saying I am a student, you say I would be a student. That's incorrect. Okay, so there's that. And I would also mention in the other class I talked for a minute about, so far I've talked about like keeping your sentences short and making sure you've got not too many main clauses. You should have at least one main clause. You shouldn't write run-on sentences. I think I talked about that already. You need punctuation in between each sentence. One other point before we move on is basically the idea of how to punctuate relative clauses. And that's actually harder. That if you can get that, that's that's the hardest thing in writing. The relative clauses are like they're a kind of a subordinate clause that starts with a pronoun, and so they can start with words like who, which, where, wherever, and like the relative pronouns that and which, and who, I think. And basically, if you say the professor who, okay, I can do that. The professor who taught us clauses is Professor Langbert. Okay, so basically, in this relative clause, you're defining who the professor is. So you've got 100 professors and you're defining who the professor is. If you insert commas, what you're doing is you're no longer defining who the professor is, you're describing the professor. So if you use commas with relative clauses, what you're, and this is true of other things too, when a phrase even, or even a word follows another noun, if you insert commas, it's indicating that you're just describing the thing. If you omit the commas, then you're defining the thing. So the play that won the Tony Award closed. Okay, in this sentence, you're defining the play. It's the play that won the Tony Award. And you're saying that it closed. So you omit the commas because you're defining the play. Now, let's say you already know what the play is. Then you change that to which, and you insert commas before and after the relative clause. So the play, which won the Tony Award, you're describing the play, but you already know what the play is. And so you're just adding information, you're describing the play. So basically the difference between that and which is that which can be either what's called a restrictive or definitional. I made up the term definitional, but it's what it means. A restrictive or definitional relative pronoun. So you can use it either to define the thing or to add to describe the thing, whereas that can only be used to define the thing. Okay, that must be restrictive or definitional. So if you say, for instance, the country that invented fine wine is France. Okay, I don't know if it's true or not, but so what? So the country, you're defining the one country that invented fine wine, and you're defining that country. And so you use that. If you you want to describe something, so for example, if you say France, which invented fine wine, is fun to visit. Okay, so in that case, you're describing France, and you're just adding a little information. You're describing it, and so you use which with commas. So if you say the country, Russia is the country that invaded Ukraine, you are defining Russia. You're defining the country as the one country of many that invaded Ukraine. You could also write equally Russia, which invaded Ukraine, is now at war, or something like that. Okay, so you can use that or which for different purposes. And if you can get this distinction I'm making right now, that's the hardest thing really in all of like the writing stuff, the grammatical writing stuff. I don't want to overwhelm you, so let's change the subject, but a couple of little things. I'll just add a couple of little things. I can't cross things out on this board, but irregardless, never use it. Okay, it's not right, it's wrong. Irregardless is not a word, so don't use it. The other thing, never use in regards to. Okay, never use in regards to. Okay, use in regard to or as regards. Okay, regard is a noun. I have a great deal of regard to you, so it can't follow a preposition. Regards is a verb, and so you you do want to use it in that circumstance. So basically, use as regards, use in regard to, you can use with regard to, you can use regarding, but don't use in regards to. Okay, small thing, but it'll help a little. So basically, those are a few key points. And I think the biggest thing, the verb, subject verb number agreement is really important. And not using the greengrocer apostrophe. So if you're using a plural, don't use an apostrophe. If you're using a plural possessive, the apostrophe comes after the S. The soldier's mission, you put the apostrophe after the S, the soldier's mission. Or you could, if it's one soldier, then you would put the apostrophe before the S, the soldier's mission. One soldier, you put it before the S. But don't say strawberries or potatoes are on sale and put apostrophe before the S for potatoes. That's incorrect. Okay, and I did see students do it. I'm talking about it because a number of students did do it. Okay, are there any questions? Okay. Okay, we took care of the waiting room. Are there people in the waiting room still? No. Okay, so, all right, so that said, let's talk a little. Yes, Yusuf, you have a question?
I was going to ask if you took attendance, Professor.
Oh, very good. Thanks for reminding me. I forgot in one of my classes, and I don't want to forget in this class. So let's do attendance. Very good point. Farhad.
I'm here.
Good. Hello. Ahmed.
I'm here.
Hello. Mohammed Afi. Jenna Bell.
I'm here.
Hello, Jenna.
Hi.
Joseph Canizaro. Joseph.
Hello.
Okay, gotcha. Jiamin Chen.
Here.
Wait, Professor, you heard me, right?
Joseph. Mhm.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Janine. Janine Calez. Kermia Cyrus.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. David. David
I'm here.
Escarowski. You okay? Hello.
Yeah.
Marimar Garcia. Monica Garcia. Monica. Okay. Alexia Harrigan.
I'm here.
Hello, Alexia.
Wait, Professor, did you hear me?
This is Alexia. Gotcha.
Yeah, Alexia.
Gotcha.
Wait, Professor, did you hear me?
I can. Okay, here's Marimar. Kani Jiang. Or
Here.
Kani. Hello? Kani?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, is it Kani or Kani?
Kenny.
Kani, okay. Yusuf Kahan.
Yeah, I'm here, Professor.
Hello.
I think Monica's here as well. You just can't hear her.
Okay. Let me go through them, then I'll get back. Georgie.
Here.
Kurum Lishvili.
Here.
Gotcha. Thank you. Summer.
Here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hong Xian Lin.
Here.
Hello. Hamdi Mali.
Here.
Okay. Ludley Knoll.
Here.
Okay. How you doing?
I'm fine. And you?
Good. Famita Pat Wari, I'm sorry, Pat Wari. Famita,
Here, Professor.
hello. Emmanuel Plamakis.
Here.
Hello, Raquel. Raquel Porteous.
Here.
Hello. Ji Shan Ruan.
I'm here.
Good morning. Brendan is here. Aaliyah Todd.
I'm here, Professor.
Good morning. Stacy Ergiles.
I'm here.
Good morning. Denasia Warner.
Here.
Good morning. Jack Wu.
Here.
Good morning. Yayin Zhang.
I'm here, Professor.
Good morning. Matthew. Oh, I'm sorry. Yixuan Zhang.
I'm here, Professor.
Good day. Good morning. Matthew Zhao. Matt. Taryn Sander.
Good morning.
Good morning. Christian Mendez.
Good morning, Professor. Good
Good
morning.
morning. Janaya Pratt.
Here.
Janaya, good day. Good morning.
Morning.
Alexander Betts.
Here.
Hello, Alex. Jack Shrem. Jack. Hit the road, Jack. Okay, so we've got Mohammed Afi.
Here.
Okay. Janine Cola. Marimar Garcia. Monica. Marimar's here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Monica Garcia.
Here.
Okay. And Matthew Zhao. And Jack Shrem. Jack. Okay, all right. So there we go. All right, so we'll finish up the conversation about diversity and cultural differences. Basically, last time I talked about the difference between surface level and deep level diversity. And I said that deep level diversity suggests differences in values, personality, and preferences. And they become more important as we get to know people. For example, I mentioned I was watching a movie the other night about physicists, and you know, on the surface, they may come from 100 different countries, but in fact, they have more in common with each other than they do with other people from their own country, because they've studied physics for so long that there's really little else that they care about. And so they have much more in common with each other than with people from another walk of life or another realm. And I think that's part of the difference between surface level diversity and deep level diversity. And so deep level diversity suggests differences in values, personality, and preferences. It's very important for firms now to be concerned with diversity in hiring and respecting individuals of diverse race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, and things of that nature. The idea of prejudice, the basic word of prejudice just means we have a bias, like I have a prejudice towards rare steaks. That that's the right, the traditional use of the word. Your book defines it a little more specifically as an attitude representing broad generalized feelings toward a group or its members that maintains an unequal hierarchy. So basically, I think part of the reason is that that's the kind of prejudice that firms are most concerned about. In contrast, stereotyping means judging someone based on our perception of the group to which that person belongs. And we do it all the time. And much of the time, there's no real issue there. For instance, we have a certain stereotype about someone who's a physicist. We may make assumptions about them, and much of the time those will be correct. It's not a crime to say, well, someone's got a PhD in physics, they're probably smart or something like that. But basically, where it becomes problematic is that there are excluded groups who we stereotype, and then the stereotypes lead us to making generalizations about their abilities or potential, and then we exclude them from various opportunities and jobs and things like that. And so basically, firms need to be concerned about that kind of prejudice, in part because it leads to illegal discrimination, and in part because it's not ethical. So basically, we all have these prejudices, and the idea of implicit bias is that we're not always aware of what these assumptions are. So a lot of the time we need to check our thinking in our attitudes to make sure that implicit biases are not at play. And one of the big ideas, and why this is an important subject for OB and HR, and also for managerial skills as well. I mean, pretty much in all areas of business, prejudice can result in discriminatory actions or habits that maintain or reinforce disadvantages. Okay, and we don't want to do that. And besides the fact that it's illegal. Now, I think I mentioned last time that the law defines two basic kinds of discrimination. This came out. We don't have time to go over the history. I do a little bit of that in my HR class, but there was a huge amount of what's called Jim Crow laws that discriminate against Blacks, against African Americans, that were passed between 1890 and 1950. And these laws were called Jim Crow laws after a comedian who performed in blackface, and the character's name was Jim Crow. And basically the discriminatory laws, there's a famous book by C. Van Woodward, who was a historian at Yale years ago, called The Strange Career of Jim Crow. And what Woodward argued in that book was that Jim Crow didn't evolve until the 1890s, that it was not a natural response to the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves. Now, there are reasons why you might think it would cause that would cause the Jim Crow laws, but he showed thoroughly that it was not the case. And what occurred in the 1890s, I forget, I read the book when I was very young, I can't remember now, but I don't think he emphasizes that what was going on in the 1890s was the advent of big government, was the advent of progressivism. And that was in concert with the passage of the Jim Crow law. So in other words, the Jim Crow laws were part of the initial progressivism. And this was brought to a head by Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic president, who in many ways created the modern Democratic Party, who instilled the Jim Crow laws in Washington, D.C. Wilson was the one who implemented the Jim Crow laws during his presidency. He was a Southerner. He was the president of Princeton University, but he originally came from the South. And basically that continued until through the 1940s. There's a great movie, if you have nothing to do one evening, The Great Debaters, with Forrest Whitaker and Denzel Washington, a really fine movie. And it's about a debating team at a small college during the 1940s. And it's fictional. It's like half fiction, half fact. It's kind of about how the civil rights movement evolved out of that period. And basically, the Civil Rights Act in 1964 prohibited discrimination against 5 groups. And the 5 groups were 5 categories, not groups, 5 categories. The categories are race, color, national origin, religion, and gender. I think I said all 5: race, color, religion, national origin, and gender. And so basically employers needed, and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is the one that addressed the workplace. That's what I'm talking about, the 5 categories. And so Title VII required that, basically to respond to it, firms had to start worrying about discrimination, which they didn't. I mean, when I was young, before the Civil Rights Act, so until I was like 10 or 11 years old, the newspapers used to advertise separate jobs for male and female. So, there'd be like help wanted male or help wanted female. That went away with that, and among a lot of other things. So, so basically, the idea that you treat categories of people differently is called disparate treatment, and that's illegal. So, if you're interviewing, just as an example, you're interviewing and you ask women whether they have children, but you don't ask men whether they have children. That would be a form of disparate treatment. Disparate impact is slightly different. It was created by the courts. And the idea in disparate impact is that if you have an objective measure, like it could be like whether you require a high school diploma for a janitor's job. The case that originally created it was about that very thing. And so if you have a high school diploma requirement for a janitor's job, but half of one group doesn't have the diploma, but 95% of the other group has the diploma. So what disparate impact says is that if you're using a requirement and there's a differential rate that can meet the requirement, then that idea is disparate impact. And that would then result in, it doesn't mean that there's discrimination. What it means is that the burden of proof that the measure isn't discriminatory falls on the employer. So like if you have a high school diploma and you can show that having a high school diploma requirement, you can show that having a high school diploma requirement is associated with knowing how to handle a lathe. And in order to do a good job, you have to handle a lathe. And so they teach you in high school how to handle a lathe. And therefore, everyone who went to high school can handle the lathe. But if you didn't go to high school, you don't know how to handle a lathe. So if you can show that statistically, then the measure is correlated with actual job performance. And so the disparate impact is legitimate. It's allowed. You can have disparate impact and not be discriminatory if the requirement is related to the job. And the same is true with, incidentally, with disparate treatment. Like, for example, if you're hiring an actor for a movie and it's a female role. And so you say, okay, well, we're only going to hire a female actress for this role. That's not discrimination. Okay, that's called business necessity. Basically, there's a valid business reason for the discrimination. So that's allowed. I mean, years ago, there was a restaurant chain called Hooters. And, the idea was like, there were like female waitresses and guys would go in to admire the female waitresses. And basically, a guy wanted to be a waiter there and he sued for sex discrimination, gender discrimination under Title VII, and lost the case because there's a valid business reason, job relatedness. In other words, it's part of the job. So, if you need a female actress for a role, it's not discrimination. So, but it's all in the case of disparate impact, it's a little bit more complicated. What you have to show is that the discrimination, that the differential impact can be justified because of a correlation between the selection method and the hiring decisions. So, for example, if you can show that, let's say you give a test to a group of people, and you can show statistically that the people who get the high scores on the test are also the people who perform the best on the job, then that test is valid, it's validated, and so it's okay to use it. So the idea of disparate impact is that there are different scores on the test, and if you can take a range of scores and correlate that range of scores with job performance ratings, then it's okay to use the test. And if it results in disparate impact, that's how the chips fall. It's not because of discrimination, it's just because of random association of that characteristic. So basically, those are the basic rules of HR. Clearly, if you're a firm that has a hostile environment to women, say, or to some subcategory of that's discussed in Title VII, one of the 5, then then it's a problem. So basically, intersectionality refers to the interaction of different aspects of identity to form different meanings and experiences, and arguably people can be viewed as cultural mosaics. I don't think there's been a lot of litigation over this idea, so I don't think it's had a huge impact on the nuts and bolts of discrimination law, but it's something that people are concerned about in industry. A lot of companies are worried about that now, and worried that they might, because of implicit biases, usually might discriminate. And so they need to be aware of that. Now, getting back to this validation of job requirements, there's a huge number of cases every year. I mean, I just looked up the numbers in the other class, and basically about 80,000 complaints are brought to the federal EEOC every year, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and even more are brought to state level body boards of the same nature. So basically, you're probably talking in hundreds of thousands of discrimination complaints. Not all of those become litigation, but at least 10% become litigation, I'm sure. And so are a good number. I mean, they don't go to court necessarily, but they the people hire a lawyer and they bring a case, and this costs the company a lot of money. So you would think that the companies would be very concerned with adhering to discrimination law and would carefully validate all the selection measures they use to make sure that they correlate with job performance. But in fact, only about a third of firms do validate their selection measures. So a lot of them, most firms will use informal interview methods of hiring. And the result is that implicit biases can creep in. Now, it seems obvious to me that there are a lot of reasons why you would want to validate your selection methods. It's not just because of discrimination. There are other reasons too, such as like hiring the best people makes the firm more productive. But amazingly, only about a third of firms validate their methods. Okay, so that said, I want to talk a little bit before I let you go about Hofstede's model of cultural differences. And arguably, cultural differences are not that important in the sense that you can find people with any given trait in almost any given culture. So, you know, I never say ever, 100%, but it's usually the case that there's a very wide range of traits in a given country. So, if you say, for example, Americans are more individualistic than other cultures, I think that's a fair generalization, but it's not 100% true. And you can find lots and lots of Americans who are not individualistic. So you have to be careful. And I think you all know this when you talk about models of cultural differences. So the original work that Hofstede did in his book, Culture's Consequences, had 4 dimensions. Then he added one, and your book adds a 6th one. So basically, you can talk about 6 dimensions associated with Hofstede. But other models have had many more. I mean, there's in my other class, in my managerial skills class, we talk about Trompenaers, and he's got 10 dimensions, including like locus of control and other ones. And so basically, you can use different models, and I think any one of them will shed some light. None is perfect or written in stone, of course. So basically, the five dimensions that Hofstede eventually arrived at are, first of all, a power distance, or the and how did he arrive at these? He was a psychologist, a personnel guy at IBM, and he did a study of all the IBM employees. So at that time, there was something like 100,000 plus IBM employees in over 100 countries. So he had a huge sample of a wide range of countries. And it's hard to get that kind of sample in this field. So the work was useful. Of course, if you just look at IBM employees, which he did, there's biases in the sample. So some IBM employees will tend to be, for instance, better off than the average person in the world. They'll tend to be probably a little smarter than most people. So basically, there are differences between IBM people and other people. However, it's hard to get an objective, a random sample. So this work was very valuable. And the five dimensions talk about, first of all, power distance or authoritarianism. Like, to what degree does the culture not mind having power differences? So in some cultures, there's a lot, like America, there's a lot of weight put on equality. And in other cultures, it's accepted that some people have more power than others. The second dimension is individualism versus collectivism. So basically, in some cultures, there's a lot of weight put on the individual. In other cultures, there's a lot of weight put on groups. So if you compare the Confucian influenced cultures of Asia with the Protestant influenced cultures of Western Europe, the Western European cultures tend to be more individualistic, and that the most of these is the United States. Britain is a second, second, we're a little bit further. And so those cultures tend to be the most individualistic, whereas like in Japan, there's much more weight put on the group. And, we're going to watch a movie by Kurosawa, Rashomon. But another one of his movies, even more famous, is The Seventh Samurai. And in that movie, the story is, a group of these Ronin, the masterless samurai, have to fight with criminals. It's a whole story, which was later turned into the Western, The Magnificent Seven. It's like an Americanization of that story. But if you look at the beautiful movie, The Seven Samurai, one of the great all-time movies, you see a lot of weight is put on the formation of the group. Much less so in most American Westerns. In most American Westerns, there's a lone gunman. There's a lot of weight put on the individual. You're Wyatt Earp or Billy the Kid or so, whatever. It's like the individual plays a big role. Whereas in Kurosawa's work and a lot of the Japanese stories. Another one is there's a story about the 26 samurai who avenged the killing of the shogun. There were a lot of these artifacts in Japanese culture that put a lot of weight on the group, rather than the individual. Incidentally, a wonderful book on Japanese culture, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword by Ruth Benedict. Writes a lot about the cultural and ethical differences between Western Europe, between America, really, not Western Europe, but they're connected, and the Confucian cultures and Japanese culture in particular, and it's well worth reading. I think you'll see a lot of the students from Asian backgrounds will see quite a few similarities as well. And so basically, one of the differences that the US differs from Japan is individualism versus collectivism. A third dimension, masculinity versus femininity, sometimes to avoid sexism, task versus relations orientation. A fourth one, uncertainty avoidance of risk. And two that the book adds, long-term versus short-term orientation. And sixth one is indulgence versus restraint. I think self-indulgence has been a problem in the US that doesn't exist as much in other countries. Okay, cultural tightness and looseness refers to the degree to which there are clear, pervasive norms and tolerance for deviation. So I think in cultures dominated by liberalism, liberalism meaning that there's basically a rule of law, that there's law that drives the rules of society, and the laws don't change and people are otherwise free. This concept of the rule of law is associated with cultural looseness, whereas cultural tightness would be more like in a communist country where there are pervasive norms and little tolerance for deviation from those norms. I would say, though, that, and this has been noted by a lot of philosophers, including Henry David Thoreau, that in America, there is often, despite the basic liberalism, the lack of legal constraints on behavior, so social prohibitions are often very strong and stronger than in Europe. So that although we have more legal freedom, we have less social freedom. There's more conformity. We can talk about that more in the future. And I think that's probably true, but it's an interesting discussion as well. So basically, cultural intelligence refers to your ability to understand and to function in different settings. Years ago, I had an IBM executive come to my class in Westchester when I used to teach in Westchester County, and their headquarters were nearby. And she had taught all over the world. And I asked her, what kind of training did you get? Yeah, we never had any training in cultural stuff. And whereas the Japanese get a lot of that training. So basically, Americans haven't been that good at cultural intelligence. And also, one other point that I kind of already mentioned is that groups often form common in-group identities, which focus on what unites them rather than what divides. And this is where you have a strong culture evolving from the group identity. And the final point I want to make, I'm kind of rushed because we're out of time, is that the contact hypothesis is valid. That if you have contact with people from a lot of divergent backgrounds, you're going to become more tolerant. So the more you're willing to interact with people from diverse backgrounds, the less the prejudice. So just one concluding point that your book makes, and I think it's absolutely true, that the best form of diversity management is to treat everyone as an individual and help everyone to develop on their own terms, and rather than slotting people or creating categories or saying this is my identity. That the management consultant Sam Ovens is a great trainer in how to start internet businesses. In one of his training sessions, talks about how he doesn't believe in a lot of this stuff. That basically, what's important is not who you are, but who you will be. Your current self just reflects the past, he says, and what really should concern you is not your identity. Your past is your identity, but rather who you want to become, what your goal is. You want to be successful. You want to be, whatever it is. We talked about what your career goals are, and that's far more important in his opinion than your past. Okay, so that said, have a nice weekend, and we will talk about, I will send you an email. Okay, so Monica said, okay, I think I got Monica. So we will talk, I will send you an email about what the assignment is for next week. Have a nice week, and sorry for going over time a little. Take care. And if you have a question, feel free to stick around and I will answer you.
Have a good
Hi,
weekend.
Professor. I
Thank
have a
you.
question.
Have a good week.
Professor, have a good one.
Take care.
Hi, Professor.
Be well.
Hi, Professor. I have a question.
Go ahead.
For the homeworks, like the discussion boards that were due so far, you've been submitting grades, correct?
Mm-hmm.
On mine, I don't see the grade. It's
Let me
just
check.
blank. It just shows like the exam, and then that's it. But I don't see the grades I have
You
for
don't
the
see your
discussion
grade?
boards.
Someone else had that problem. Let me see. Okay, CUNY first. I'm logging on to Blackboard just to see what's going on there. Okay. This is the 11 o'clock. Okay, so let me look at the grade center. Full grade center. I don't know. I see grades posted there. Try using, can you try using a different computer? Like, are you using your cell phone for it? Camilla? Hello?
Hello, sorry.
Are you using your cell phone to access the site?
I used my iPad, my phone, and my laptop, and they all don't
None of
show the
them showed it. God, I don't know what, when you get on the full grade center. Okay.
I'm gonna
click
log on right now to
On
see.
Blackboard, did you click on full grade center?
I'm gonna go on Blackboard right now and see again. Okay, I only see the one for Enron. Is that the only one you graded so far?
No, no, there should be 4 or 5 grades there. Can you scroll at the bottom? Is there a way to scroll?
I'm scrolling, but there's only one thing to scroll for.
Not sure what the problem would be.
Yeah, I just see the one for Enron. So I got 3
Okay,
out of 4.
let me contact IT. I don't see anything. Let me just see this. Can you see anything now?
I'm gonna reload. No, it still shows the Enron.
You still can't see it. Let me check. Let me look at one of the columns. Okay, I just turned one off. Okay, now I'll turn it back on again. You can't see what color is your parachute?
No,
What's your last name?
Cyrus, Cyrus.
I have grades for you here.
Okay, now I see the goals, and then I see DB3 for on goals.
Okay, and do you see numbers there?
Yes.
Those are the grades.
Hmm.
Okay,
But I don't see what color is your parachute.
you don't?
No, so it only shows. It's only showing goals presentation and then DB3 on goals.
Okay, so there should be 4. Enron, what color? WCIYP discussion board, goals presentation, and discussion board 3 on goals. And you only see 3 of the 4?
Okay, now I'm seeing the other ones, but like I have to click on like due date, oldest first. I see what color is your parachute. Okay, now I see it.
Which key? The students see something different from me, so I'm not entirely sure what you've got. What are
When
you clicking on?
I clicked on order by, like when I click on the class and then I clicked on all, you have to go on the side where it says order by, and like you can like see the different grades from course order, last activity, due date latest first, and then due date oldest first. When I clicked on oldest first, then I see Enron, what colors your parachute discussion board, and then presentation.
Okay, so let's talk about this in the next class so you can tell everyone what you did, so make sure that other people know what to do also, because I don't have any of that, and I can't really see what you're talking about. Okay,
Okay.
so we'll
Mhm.
talk. now that you solved the problem, which is good. So let's talk about in the next class, and then we'll get it resolved. Okay, thank you very much for telling me
No
that.
problem.
Take care.
You too.
Okay, anyone else? Ludley?